This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to the next edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We are talking today with Wendy Parker, who is one of our great journalists in town who covers news in Cobb County, specifically East Cobb, right?
East Cobb News.
The East Cobb News. So we're going to talk about what the East Cobb News is and why it is and what she likes to get done and focus on. And we'll talk a little bit about, what brought Wendy to this place where she is editing the East Cobb News. So let's start with, what is the East Cobb News and how do people find it?
East Cobb News is an all-online general interest news, a website and community information resource, eastcobbnews.com, and it's like a newspaper in the focus, but it's all online, and I publish typically multiple times, Monday through Saturday. I have a newsletter that goes out on Sunday, and I publish breaking news stories and things like that on Sunday. I try to get away from the screen at least one day a week, but sometimes there are stories that happen on Sunday that you can't avoid. And I just celebrated my 6th anniversary. I launched this in July of 2017. So it's been a very eventful time. The pandemic came right in the middle of all this, and it's kind of changed a lot of what I do and how I do what I do. But I think for the better. I learned a lot of things about myself and about resilience and what local news means for a community when you're going through an extraordinary time. So it's been a challenge, but it's been the most gratifying work of my career, and I've been in this business now almost 40 years.
So when you say East Cobb News, which city is in that area do you cover?
There's not a city, although there was a cityhood referendum last year that flamed out. 73% said no. It's all unincorporated area. It's basically all of Cobb County east of I-75 and I-575. And that's a big area. Cobb County is almost 800,000 people now. My coverage area is around 200,000 based on the latest census. So it's a big area. I've got 30-something schools, dozens of community and neighborhood organizations, hundreds of locally run businesses. It's a big place, and there's always plenty of stuff to cover and people to meet. And I'm still learning about. I grew up here. I'm still learning new things every day about this place. It's not just that it's big, but there's just, it's just so different from when I was a kid.
And I guess a little bit about your background before you started East Cobb. What's your journalist, your background that got you here?
I was a print person. I was a newspaper reporter for 25 years, an editor. 18 of those years were at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It's been 15 years since I left there now. And after that, I did some freelance writing, and I started the East Cobb Patch website when AOL had the hyperlocal network called Patch. I started the East Cobb site back in 2010, and then they sold that in 2014, and we got laid off. And the seed was planted during that time that I knew I wanted to do something like this. I saw the opportunity to really do deeply reported, what I call hyperlocal news. Some people think of it as an epithet, but I go really, really deep. And I did that for 3.5 years. And I did some more freelancing. I worked at WAB radio for a while and, learned about the radio world. It was really, really fascinating. And I launched this, as I said, in July of 2017, and it's been a ride, it's been a journey, but I'm really enjoying what I do, and my community is too. They're telling me all the time how valuable they find it, and I feel like I'm on a pretty good roll coming out of the pandemic, and can get on to a lot of other things now that are really important to people in this community.
So I think it's important for folks to understand the kind of news that you want to write about, and as importantly, the kind of news that you don't want to write about. And the reason I say that is because I do seek with these podcasts is to get you good stories from other folks around who might be listening, and B, have you not get pitches from people who are pitching things that aren't appropriate for the East Cobb News, right?
Yeah, I
So
get a lot of that.
yeah,
And that's, I mean, I've been used to that. We got that in the newspaper world. And frankly, if there's not a local, if it's not local in any way, I'm not going to respond to it. I mean,
yeah,
I don't have time. And I understand they have a lot of people on their mailing list that they're just trying to get a placement somewhere. I understand what PR people do. I'm not against that. But I will try to work with someone if it's somewhat local. It's not always, and I really try to make that point. Nothing against Smyrna or Sandy Springs or Woodstock or Buckhead, but I don't cover those areas. My coverage area is, as I said, the eastern part of Cobb County. If you go to the east of the interstates, that's what I consider East Cobb, and that's what I cover. And I know the Marietta address. And Marietta is not just East Cobb, it's the city of Marietta, it's north of Marietta, it's west, it's south. So the zip codes kind of throw people off too.
right.
If you're an out-of-town PR person, you might not know that. So I kind of give them the benefit of the doubt.
Well,
But
even people who are on the my side of town towards
right,
the North Lake Decatur area, like
right.
where exactly is East Cobb? Where's
It's
East
an
Cobb?
exotic,
Where
it's
is
an
it?
exotic area with lots of frozen yogurt stands and,
Do you have lots of frozen yogurt? Because I like frozen yogurt. Do you have lots of frozen yogurt up there?
not as many as there used to be.
Ah, okay.
And I guess as a result, we have a lot of dentists too. I don't know if that's,
It's
it's
kind of
it's
perpetuating the economy
yeah.
there.
It is a suburban area, but it's not a totally bedroom community like it used to be. We have shopping centers and malls here, like the Avenue East Cobb is right down the road from me, and the people who redevelop Colony Square and Atlantic Station are redeveloping this, and they're going to have a concert stage and some other, a plaza and public events there. So it's people don't want to have to go to the city to do things that are kind of like, beyond just the typical suburban things. And you don't really have to go very far to do a lot of different things around here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if people do have good ideas, and I think you gave a good kind of geographic boundary line of,
Mm-hmm.
east of I'm not going to say it. You tell me that again. So we
I'll
repeat
tell
that.
you, but zip codes make it easier.
Okay.
It's zip codes 30062, which is actually bigger than the entire city of Marietta, which is the county seat. 62, 66, 67, 68. And there's a portion of Roswell 30075 that is also in extreme northeast Cobb County, the Shallowford Road, Johnson Ferry Road, anywhere north and east of that. That's about 9,000 people. So it's sort of like 3 or 4 different communities all in one. Roughly between the Powers Ferry Road corridor in Cobb and the Canton Road, Bells Ferry Road area to the north. So but yeah, that's and there are people who do understand, the constraints that I have, but I've got to put boundaries down somehow, not just for time, but just relevance to my readers.
Yeah.
As I said, I mean, nothing against. I would love for this area to have like a cool little downtown area like Woodstock does, but and I know people go up there or to Roswell for the restaurants and all that, but I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on something that's not really right in my community.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's good. I mean, hyperlocal, I think is great, and it really focuses on news in a specific community. And if you start kind of creeping outside that, then people are like, oh, she's supposed to be East Cobb, but she's got all this West Cobb stuff in there and the Sandy Springs stuff.
Yeah, there are some things that I will do, like if it's arts or something that isn't here, like things in downtown Marietta. They've got, the square there and concerts and art exhibits. I'll do something like that because we do have a little bit of that here,
right.
But generally, I really try to focus just on what's in my very, very big wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like you got plenty to keep you busy enough there.
I do.
And letting your folks know what you got. So if folks have a good idea, or they think they have a good idea, and hopefully they'll listen to this and have better ideas.
Mhm.
What's the best way to get information to you?
Just I prefer email. I know people send texts and Facebook Messenger. I get that. I prefer email at Wendy at eastcobbnews.com
Okay.
or editor at East, and that can be a story idea or story with photos, a calendar listings. I get that all the time. So yeah, anything that I can put on the site. I get messages. Sometimes I have like a community resource page of listings of libraries and parks and churches and who our elected officials are. And if I need to update that or correct that,
Right.
people help me with that all the time. My editors are really people in the community. It's not like I had when I was at the newspaper, editors to edit your work. People tell you, when there's a typo or something that needs to be updated in a story. I'm glad to hear about that because I want to have information that's correct and useful, and so there's someone who has a website. She and her husband out in Seattle, and they're sort of the model for what I like to get inspired by, and she refers to what she does as community collaborative, and that's it's a lot of words, a lot of syllables, but they make it better. I mean, a woman last spring, not this past spring, but in 2022, gets my newsletter and sent a few paragraphs and a picture of her son who just scored a perfect score in the SAT. And people like that kind of stuff. It's people, their neighbors in the community.
Right.
And the kid was a sophomore. It's like it's all downhill from there now. Well, I'm thinking of going to MIT, Stanford, great. Last week I wrote a story about another reader who got in touch with me. He got a kidney transplant earlier this week, and his son was his donor. And it really was a story about family solidarity and this 21-year-old boy giving up his kidney for his dad.
Yeah.
I just, it's everyday people that I do this for. And when you have more of that on your site and in your newsletter and really reflecting the fabric of the community, I think that it's a real special thing to be able to do that.
Yeah, and obviously those are the kinds of stories you want to continue getting, those kind of
Oh yeah,
good community kinds of stories like that.
All the time. It might be a story tip about a water main break or the cops roaring down the road last night, what's going on, a shop opening up or closing, that sort of thing. Yeah, people do keep in touch with me a lot about that. And I think that's what makes this, like I said, I just think it makes it better. And I hope they keep doing it.
Well, good. That's good. All right. So this next question, my fourth question here is always the hardest question that always stumps people. So I'm going to ask, what is the coolest thing about Wendy that people might not know? And that could be like a hobby or a talent, things you collect.
Well, here's something that happened since the last time I talked to you. And I think we talked not long after I launched the site. And for months, I'm like, what was I thinking? 3 years ago, I got word. When I was at the Journal-Constitution, I was a sports writer, and I covered women's college basketball, among other things, college football, soccer, Olympic sports. And I covered a lot of women's college basketball for the AJC and also for a national basketball magazine called Basketball Times. And this was in the 90s and early aughts when women's games were getting on television. ESPN was covering a lot of more games. They were playing the Final Four. They had at the Georgia Dome one year, and 30,000 people watching. Girls in pigtails playing basketball. I never thought I'd see that. And so there was an organization of people who cover college basketball called the U.S. Basketball Writers Association. And they called me right before Christmas in 2019 and said, well, you've been inducted into the U.S. BWA Hall of Fame. I'm like, this was like 2 years after I started East Cobb News. I wasn't doing sports anymore, but that was really, really, I was just blown away by that. I didn't know I'd been nominated or anything. And I was the second person to be inducted who primarily covered women's college basketball. And this was an organization founded back in the 50s, and it was mostly men and guys like John Feinstein, Bob Ryan, Dick Weiss, people I got to know through this organization, picked my brain on women's basketball. Like, these guys are like terrific, well-known writers, and they're asking me. And so we were supposed to have the induction ceremony at a luncheon in Atlanta in April of 2020, because that's where the Final Four is going to be played that year. But something came up and, they didn't have the Final Four. They didn't have anything for a long time. So, my dad said, "Are they still going to put you in?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just not getting the plaque in person." So we had a Zoom call the next year, and they invited me on that. And then I did get the plaque in the mail last summer, so I still have it. And it was a real gratifying thing. I didn't get into journalism to win awards. You get something like that, and even though I'm not doing that anymore, I was just deeply honored by that, and I'll always think fondly of those times. But it's a different time for me, and I'm glad I did all that. But I can't imagine I'm doing it now. It's crazy with the way the industry is, and I got tired of the travel. I love the travel.
Right.
I still have a bunch of Delta miles I need to figure out what to do with. It was almost like a different lifetime ago. But that's something that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
That's cool, and that's a great one.
Yeah.
All right. So the next couple of questions are kind of my little lightning round. So you don't have to go into detail on these, kind of quick answers. So what is the last book you've read or the last podcast you listened to?
Well, I listen to podcasts almost every day. I like Dave O'Brien's Braves podcast that he does for The Athletic, former AJC beat writer. He and Eric O'Flaherty, former pitcher, get into that. I'm going to try to listen to that here before the game starts. The last book I read, I'm reading a lot more business and entrepreneurial books, obviously being a business owner. This called The Introvert Entrepreneur, and it really spoke to me. I've been trying for so long to fit myself into an extrovert template, and I'm really not. And this really helps you, be comfortable in your own skin and use those advantages of listening and things like that, sales and networking, and learning how to deal with rejection when you lose an advertising client or prospect or something. And it really, I've underlined it and earmarked it, and I'm going to, it's really been a help. Those are the kinds of things I really like to read about, and that really, really hit me where I live.
Okay. Favorite local restaurant?
Oh, I don't have a favorite. I'm trying to talk to various restaurants about advertising, but there's a little bakery and cafe that just opened up near me. That the woman was a baker, and she would sell pastries and donuts at the Marietta Farmers Market. And customers would ask, "Well, what are you going to do your own cafe?" And she finally opened it up earlier in the spring. And they make the goods there on site. You can get sandwiches there, omelets, and it's Mediterranean fare. Her husband is Jewish, and she did that in honor of him and converted for him. And so I like to stop by there after church. It's near my church and not too far from where I live. It's called Cafe Rivka, a very nice little mom and pop place.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Favorite guilty pleasure?
Oh, gosh. I don't really, I don't subscribe, I hate to say this, to print publications anymore, but I do love to pick up at the supermarket Garden Gun magazine, which comes out 6 times a year.
Great magazine.
It's Southern, upscale Southern.
Yeah.
I love the ads as much as anything, believe it or not. One of my former AJC editors is the digital officer there, and it must be great for him living in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah. All right. What's a good local getaway that you like?
I love to go to my local parks. I always did, and before the pandemic. But and they even shut parks down here in Cobb County for 6 weeks back in the spring of 2020, which still blows my mind. But once they reopened, I go to East Cobb Park. I love to go to Azalia Park in Roswell. It's right by the river. That's fresh air, sunshine. I've made friends there. I see people there that I've become at least acquainted with. It's a great community thing to do, and get out there and do some walking, and it frees my mind. And I do want to get up to the mountains when the fall comes. We have great state parks here in Georgia.
Yeah.
Something that, but when I'm just staying really close to home, it's usually my local parks.
All right. And last question, favorite non-work hobby?
Well, I believe it or not, I just can't stop typing. I do have one foot still in the sports world. Before I started East Cobb News, I started a newsletter about sports books and history. And I don't do that every week now. But I'm going to try to get something done this weekend.
Yeah.
And new books that are coming out, books, from his, way back when. And I have about 300, 400 subscribers. A lot of them are book authors who send me their books. And it's a little bit deeper dive. It goes, beyond what's in the sports media now, but there's a lot of stuff out there. And I just enjoy interacting with people. I hear from sports writers in Australia, of all places. One guy sent me an Aussie rules book that, the shipping was more expensive than the book. But
That's great.
That's all right. So that there's a nice little fraternity there of those of us who get into that. That's something that, and it's a good creative outlet for me too, to do something very different. It kind of unlocks my brain a little bit from local news mode. So right. I always like to do something on the side like that anyway.
That's great. Wendy, thank you so much for taking some time. We've been talking with Wendy Parker, who's the founder, editor, publisher, director of IT, HR director for the East Cobb News.
Rep.
Yeah, and you can find East Cobb News at eastcobbnews.com, right?
eastcobbnews.com, right.
Yes, that's easy to remember.
Thank you very much, Mitch. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. And as always, look for our podcast series on YouTube or on our website. Click that subscribe button, please. And if you're looking for our database of local journalists, Leff Atlanta Media, please go and click on leffsatlantamedia.com, and you can subscribe and tune in twice a month for our 4 Questions Journalist Spotlight. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Mitch.